Hi, welcome to our home bar and welcome to our YouTube channel, Wise Whiskey. I'm Tony, and today we're going to talk about 10 craft distilleries that I think you should try out if you haven't yet. The thing about craft distilleries is there's hard to come up with an actual definition. A lot of times that word's kind of thrown around. I spent a long time in the craft beer industry, and that was one of the arguments I had was that what does craft mean? And so for this video, for the sake of this, what I have done is decided to pick 10 brands that are not currently owned by one of the large spirit suppliers that own a catalog full of brands. To my knowledge, all of these distilleries are independently owned. Now they may have some investors or they may have like a, private equity firm who's put a stake in it, but they're not owned by like a Pernod Ricard, a Brown-Forman, a Sazerac, a De Serono, all the different suppliers out there that own some of the craftier type distilleries in America today. And then for the most part, these guys are grain to glass. They're making their own. Now I do have a category with a couple that I would consider craft brands who are making really great product, but a lot of times they're sourcing. So I do have that. And a lot of times with craft, if you've had craft whiskey, there are certain funky notes or kind of off-putting notes that some can have. So I've tried to pick brands that I think are making things that are interesting, that are good quality, that for the most part are available and are, good price points, relative value, but also interesting and different. Those things matter. But at the same time, none of these have particularly challenging palate or flavor profiles. These are, for the most part, making whiskeys that can stand next to a legacy supplier or legacy distilleries, and you can put them side by side and they're in those categories, right? So starting with distilleries that are, that are making this, we'll do the sourcing last, but starting with distilleries that are making their own product, not just aging or bottling and blending, but fully making the product, and they're making more traditional American bourbon and rye. My first is New Riff. I'm a big fan of these guys. I love their bottles. They're out of Kentucky, but right on the Ohio border, so they're not from an area that a lot of other distilleries are coming from. Most of their traditional lineup is bottled in bond. They do have a malted rye that's 6 years, and they do have a newer 8-year bourbon that's out now. But most of their products, their single barrel and traditional rye and bourbon, are going to be bottled in bond, so aged at least 4 years and bottled at 100 proof. They've got the mash bill right here. So this is the traditional bourbon, and this is 65% corn, 30% rye, and 5% malted barley. It's actually what I have in this first glass here. And it's just a classic bourbon. There's a little bit of that spice because it's a high rye mash bill. You get a little bit of that brown sugar and vanilla. There's a slight fruitiness to this one. My first sip of the day, so there's a little bit of an ethanol touch to it. Yeah, just really good classic bourbon. It's sweet, a little bit of spice, a little bit of vanilla. It's got a nice evolution to it, a little bit of warmth. It's just a really well-made bottle, and I believe this is in the $40 range. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I picked this bottle up. I have their 6-year malted rye and love that bottle as well. I think it's super interesting. And actually, my dad was visiting and just bought the 8-year bourbon, and I'm going to do a short that'll come out in a couple weeks featuring that one as well. So just a big fan of what these guys do. New Riff out of Kentucky. The second one I have on the list is going to be Hard Truth. Now these guys are out of Indiana, and they make a full line of bourbons and ryes. This is the High Road Rye, so it's kind of their 93 proof, minimum of 3 years. Rye whiskey, kind of, they have a higher proof, I think higher age stated rye, and then they do some finished ryes. We actually have a limited single barrel pick here called Maple Brulee that is one of my all-time favorite rye whiskeys I've ever tried. Very sweet, very dessert-like, but really good. So Hard Truth, though, Indiana-based, they're just making fantastic stuff. I'm a huge fan of their whole lineup, and the High Road Rye here, you definitely know it's a rye. There's a little bit on that first sniff that gives you some of the kind of bourbon rye characteristics where you're getting a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of spice. But then you do get a little bit of that kind of hay or grassy note. Not overpowering. There's a little bit of an herbal note there. A little bit of like a caraway type herbal note. And on the palate. Yeah, it's soft. There's enough sweetness there that the grassy and herbal notes, the spice notes that are there are balanced. There's a little bit of a dill type note on the palate that wasn't really in the nose, but the sweetness carries through. It does have a good bit of rye spice to it. There's a peppercorn kind of finish that lingers. But for something that's 93 proof and 3 years old, it's got a lot of complexity. It's got a lot of viscosity to it. Just a really great value buy at right around 40, 45 bucks, I believe. Everything I've had from these guys is good, if not great. And I'm excited to see what they keep doing as they start putting out some older stuff, similar to what we've seen New Riff start doing. And then third, for my more traditional bourbon and rye lineup, out of Texas is Still Austin. You'll note when you look at their bottles and they're listing the ages on there, Still Austin, because it's Texas based, definitely gonna be doing a little bit younger whiskey. It just really, it's just necessary. Texas whiskey ages faster. And if you start getting into really old Texas whiskey, I think it gets too much barrel character and gets very over oaked. I think a lot of even younger Texas whiskey can have too much barrel character and can get very tannic and bitter. And for the most part, I think Still Austin stays away from that. I'm not going to say that I am completely enamored with Still Austin like some other folks are, but I do think they make a good product. I think they make consistently good product across their lineup. And I think for a craft distiller, they're doing a great job. And you're seeing them grow specifically right now in a time when a lot of folks within the industry are struggling. So they definitely deserve some kudos for that too. They've been kind of able to weather the storm of the slowing alcohol market in general. So for my three more traditional bourbon and rye whiskeys, we're going to go with Still Austin out of Texas, Hard Truth out of Indiana, and New Riff out of Kentucky. Next, we're going to go with three more American producers that are actually it's four, not three. These are all making a more malt forward or using unique grain or mash bills. So the first one I've got here, I've featured on this channel before for sure, and that's JT Mellick. This is a family farm distillery out of Louisiana making rice whiskey. It is so good. The pricing is great. And I just love that it's a small family farm distillery. I think it's super interesting that they're making a rice whiskey that tastes like this. It's just, most people would never guess it's not a bourbon, but it does have some unique flavor characters that I think are really good, that make it just interesting enough that you know you have something different. So I'm a huge JT Mellick fan. Another Texas distillery here and a whiskey that I've definitely featured on the channel before is Stryker by Andalusia. So Andalusia is making American single malt and kind of European style whiskeys in the hill country of Texas. All of their whiskeys interesting and good. I do think Stryker is the most interesting that they make. And this is going to be smoked, but it's not going to be used peat. They're using American woods that you would find in Texas hill country barbecue. So you get some very smoky kind of barbecue style notes. And being from the hill country in Texas for a long time, every once in a while I do really love that flavor profile. Another distillery that I don't think it gets talked about enough and does some really interesting stuff is Chattanooga. This is the Chattanooga 111. It's their cash strength. They're doing some very malt heavy, so malted barley. They're doing a lot of barley forward right now. This is a bourbon. The number one grain is corn, but this mash bill has malted rye, caramel malted barley, and honey malted barley. They're doing a relatively long fermentation at 7 days. They tell you the cooperage that they're using, and it's non-filtered at all. And their batch size on this is typically 6 to 10 barrels, and they're usually just over 2 years. I can tell you that you would not think this is a young Tennessee whiskey. It doesn't really have Tennessee whiskey notes at all, and it doesn't really have young whiskey notes at all. This particular bottle, the 111, I think has a slightly, not sweet tea, not like you go to a fast food place and get that syrupy tea that you get in the South a lot, but it has an iced tea, kind of a black tea, just slightly earthy and tannic note that I really love. It's got a little bit of spice to it with that malted rye. It's sweet, but it's kind of like a soft honey sweet. It's subdued. Just a really interesting pour. I don't think I've ever tasted another whiskey quite like it. I've had a couple of their other expressions that are really great too. And I just love that they're messing around with the malt bill and doing some different things. They're making bourbon, but with a really malt forward, unique approach. So I am a big fan of the Chattanooga Whiskey Company, in particular, Chattanooga 111. And then again, a whiskey that I've featured on this channel before, but a company that I'm a huge fan of and think they're just making really unique, incredible whiskey is Westward out of Oregon. This is a American single malt distiller. A lot of their distillers have a background in craft brewing, which is common in the Pacific Northwest. And I just think it lends a really kind of exploratory and unique approach, because oftentimes whiskey distillers really focus on keeping the malt and the distillation, the fermentation really consistent, and they play with the barrels, the proof in the barrels. And these guys like to play around with the malt a little more in the fermentation, because that's very common in beer. And so one of the ways that you get new flavors and you do things, brewers tend to approach that differently than distillers. And I think the fact that they're doing a little bit of that lends themselves to making some really incredibly interesting bottles. A little bit higher on the price point, but man, when you try the whiskey, I think that their bottles deliver at that price point. So these are our four more malt forward, kind of unique mash bill whiskeys: JT Mellick, Andalusia, Chattanooga, and Westward. And I did want to do one Scotch on here because I am a big Scotch drinker, and the craft movement in Scotch is definitely kind of taking off right now and becoming a bigger deal. And again, if you watch the channel, this is a whiskey I've called out before and will continue to do. It's become one of my all-time favorite pours, and that's Isle of Raasay. So Raasay is a small independent distiller, and I love what they're making. They're doing some unique barrel finishing. They're blending peated and non-peated. They're doing some cool bottles where they take some of those things they blend and keep them separate and do them as more unique offerings. Just a big fan of what these guys do, but using American rye whiskey barrels, new barrels made out of Chinkapin oak, and Bordeaux red wine barrels. So not your typical just used bourbon or sherry cask. They're doing a little something different. And then they're taking those peated, unpeated whiskeys, aging them in those, and then blending it all together to come up with the final product. Huge fan of Raasay as well. And then lastly, I wanted to spotlight a couple companies. I think this first one is starting to distill on their own, but I am pretty sure, at least with their older batches, it was all sourced. To be 100% honest with you, I'm not sure if they're sourcing everything now or if they're or sourcing anything now, but I know in the past they were. And that's out of Northern California. It's Redwood Empire. And they have a rye, a bourbon, and a burr rye. And then they've got cask strength versions. They have bottled and bond releases. They've got other unique releases. But I love that their flagship lineup, so the Pipe Dream Bourbon, Emerald Giant Rye, and then the Lost Monarch Burr Rye, are all in the $30 range. So really affordable price point. And this is the Lost Monarch here. And I just think it's a killer entry-level bottle. I'm not always a giant fan of the Burr Rye blends, but this one's killer in my opinion. I think this is the best of the three flagships. I've heard if you get into the cask strength rye is the best. Yeah, it's just a awesome mix of rye and bourbon here. You get some of both. Some of the sweetness, you get some of the herbal and the kind of spice, a little bit of funk to it. Just a really easy drinking whiskey that kind of gives you the best of both worlds. And again, low $30 range. So great price point. So Redwood Empire out of North California. And then lastly, Barrel. So these guys do a lot of blending, but they're really great about letting you know where they're blending from, what they're combining. So like this is Seagrass. This is one of my wife's favorite bottles. This is a cask strength blend of rye whiskeys that have been finished in Martinique apricot brandy and Martinique rum, apricot brandy, and Madeira wine barrels. And this was sourced from Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, and Canada. And man, it is just so good. The Barrel Foundation double barrel finish is a great bottle as well. 5 years old, 100 proof, right at like 50, $55. I think Barrel makes some really interesting stuff, does some of the coolest barrel finishings you can find. And they're blending everything, but they're very transparent and upfront about it. And I don't have a problem with sourcing whiskey and blending it. If anything, the only time I have a problem with it is when people source and then try to label things to surprise you with that, and confuse you, or make it seem like they're doing everything from scratch when they're not. You know, there's no problem with sourcing something and finishing it or barrel aging it or even just blending something that's all completely done and putting it in a bottle. I just don't like when people try to hide that. So I think Barrel puts out great stuff, and I think they're transparent about what they're doing. And I just don't have a problem with that at all. So yeah, this is 10 craft distilleries from mostly here. We've got the one Scotch as well in a few different categories. You can definitely find good craft whiskey that's available in a lot of markets, that's not overly expensive, and that does deliver on quality and unique flavors while still being recognizable as the category that you're in. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate you sitting down with me and joining me today. If you did, please, if you did enjoy it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more. And as always, I'm going to ask that you drink responsibly, drink respectfully, but most of all, have fun doing it. Till next time, cheers.